It was supposed to be one of the happiest evenings of their lives. The house smelled of vanilla candles and freshly cooked food, the kind of warm scent that made guests feel welcome as soon as they stepped in. She had spent the whole day decorating, the living room with gold balloons and tiny fairy lights that twinkled softly against the curtains. There was laughter, music, and a big smile on her face as she checked everything again and again, making sure it all looked perfect. It was her husband's birthday, and she wanted to make it special. He had been talking about this day for weeks. He said he wanted something simple, just family and a few close friends, nothing too expensive. But deep down she wanted to surprise him, to make him feel appreciated. After all, he had been working so hard lately. So she took the extra step. She ordered a beautiful 3-layer cake from a bakery he loved, got his favorite drinks, and even bought him a small watch she'd been saving for. The evening began beautifully. Friends arrived with smiles and wrapped gifts. Music played in the background and the room buzzed with happiness. Everyone sang and laughed, taking photos and making jokes about getting older. He looked genuinely happy, and that alone made all the effort worth it. When she brought out the cake with its bright candles and golden frosting, everyone clapped. He smiled wide, made a wish, and blew out the candles as the room filled with cheers. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Later, when most of the guests had left, the house fell quiet again. Only a few close relatives stayed behind to help clean up. The dishes were stacked, the balloons slowly started losing air, and the laughter faded into the soft hum of the refrigerator. She was tired but content. She felt she had done well. The food was good, the guests were happy, and her husband had enjoyed his night. But then came the conversation that changed everything. He was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, while she collected plates and cake wrappers. Without looking up, he said, "So, how much did all this cost?" His tone wasn't angry, just curious, at least at first. She smiled and replied softly, "Not too much. I used what I had and put the rest on my card. I'll pay it off soon." He looked up from his phone, frowning slightly. "Wait, you mean you didn't pay for everything yet?" She hesitated. "Not all of it, no, just most of it. I still owe a little to the bakery and the decorator, but I'll take care of it next week. Don't worry." His face changed immediately. The warmth that had been there all evening vanished. "You mean to tell me we threw this whole party, invited everyone, and you didn't even pay them fully?" His voice rose just enough for the others in the room to hear. Her smile faded. She tried to stay calm. "It's not that serious. I wanted you to have a nice birthday. I didn't want to bother you about money." He shook his head and stood up, pacing a little. "You should have told me. You know we have bills coming up. We don't have money to owe people for cakes and decorations. Why would you do this?" His words started to sting. She wasn't trying to make things worse. She just wanted him to feel celebrated. The last few months had been rough. Long work hours, stress, and very little time together. She thought this party would lift his mood. But now, instead of feeling appreciated, he looked frustrated and disappointed. She tried to explain. "I thought it would make you happy. Everyone had a good time. You smiled the whole evening. I just didn't want to make money an issue tonight." He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "It's not about the party, it's about being responsible. You don't just spend money you don't have." The tone in his voice was sharper now, and she could feel her heart sinking. She didn't like arguments, especially after such a beautiful night. She picked up a plate and began to clean quietly, hoping he would calm down. But instead he kept going, mumbling under his breath about how she didn't think things through, how she always tried to do too much. Each word felt like a small cut. His sister, who was still sitting nearby, tried to ease the tension. "Come on, it's just a party," she said gently. "Don't ruin the night over money. You both worked hard for this." But he wasn't listening anymore. His pride was hurt. He hated the thought of owing anyone money, even a small amount. The more he thought about it, the more irritated he became. He turned to his wife again and said, "So you planned all this behind my back, spent money we don't have, and now we're in debt over a cake?" She put down the plate slowly and met his eyes. "I didn't do it behind your back, I did it for you. You deserved one good night. I didn't think you'd be upset over a few dollars." That was when his temper snapped. He looked at the half-finished cake sitting on the counter. The same. One everyone had admired just hours ago, and something inside him boiled over. He grabbed a handful of it and, without thinking, threw it in her direction. It happened fast. A smear of frosting hit her shoulder and slid down her dress. The room fell completely silent. His sister gasped, and even he froze, realizing what he'd just done. For a moment, no one spoke. She stood still, her hands trembling slightly, trying to process what had just happened. The sweetness of the cake mixed with the sting of humiliation. It wasn't about the frosting or the mess. It was about the disrespect that came with it. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. Inside, her heart was breaking, but she refused to let it show. The man she had just spent days planning a celebration for had thrown that very celebration back in her face, literally. He opened his mouth as if to apologize, but no words came out. His mother, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally stood up and said firmly, "That was too much. You shouldn't have done that." He looked ashamed for a second, but pride kept him silent. She slowly wiped the frosting off her shoulder, her hands shaking slightly. Then she looked straight at him. Not with anger, but with deep disappointment. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "You just threw away more than cake. You threw away respect." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the air in the room felt heavy. She turned away, picked up a towel, and quietly began cleaning the mess he had made. Every movement was slow and controlled, as if she was trying to hold herself together piece by piece. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply cleaned. The more she wiped, the more he seemed to shrink into silence. When she was done, she looked around the room, at the leftover plates, the balloons slowly deflating, the half-melted candles, and realized that the night she thought would bring them closer had instead created a distance she could feel deep in her chest. She walked to their bedroom without saying another word. A few minutes later, the sound of the door closing echoed through the house. He stood there, alone in the living room, staring at the bits of cake still stuck to the floor. His sister shook her head quietly and left him there, muttering, "You really went too far this time." The party was officially over. In that silence, he finally realized that no amount of money or pride was worth what he had just broken. But at that moment, it was too late. The candles had burned out, the guests were gone, and so was the warmth that once filled their home. That night, the sound of laughter and music was replaced by something colder, the kind of silence that follows when love begins to hurt. The next morning came with a heavy silence. The smell of cake still lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the faint scent of candles that had burned down to nothing. The balloons were half deflated, hanging limply as if they too had lost their energy overnight. The once joyful living room now looked tired, cluttered, and sad, like a reminder of how quickly happiness can disappear. She woke up early, long before the sun rose. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. Her heart still felt sore from the night before. She didn't cry, she was past that. Her tears had dried up hours ago while she lay in bed, listening to the silence in the house. What hurt her wasn't just the cake or the argument. It was the way he had looked at her. Like all her effort meant nothing. She thought about every small thing she had done to make that night special. The calls she made, the running around, the late-night baking, the careful planning, all because she wanted to see him smile. And for a while he did. That smile had made it worth it. Until everything changed, she walked into the kitchen quietly. The floor still had a few crumbs of cake from last night. The table was covered in plates and empty glasses. She picked up a sponge and started cleaning again. It was something she did when she didn't know what else to do. Cleaning gave her something to focus on, a small bit of control in a moment where she felt powerless. He came out of the bedroom an hour later. His eyes were tired and he didn't say anything at first. He just stood there watching her clean. The sound of dishes clinking in the sink was the only thing that filled the silence. Finally, he spoke softly. "You're up early." She didn't look at him. "Couldn't sleep." He shifted awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "About last night." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I got upset." "I shouldn't have." She turned to face him, cutting him off gently but firmly. You shouldn't have, but you did. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired, the kind of tired that sits deep in your chest. You threw cake at me in front of people. Over money, he lowered his head. I know. I'm sorry, I just lost my temper. She shook her head slowly. That's not losing your temper. That's losing respect. You humiliated me in my own home. I can't just forget that. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her it didn't mean anything, but the truth was it did. She had always been the one to forgive quickly, to smooth things over. But this time, something inside her had shifted. She picked up the cake box and quietly placed the leftovers in the trash. This was supposed to be a happy memory, she said softly. Now it's something I'll never forget for all the wrong reasons. He sighed deeply, running his hands over his face. I didn't mean for it to go that far. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Money's been tight and I panicked. Her voice was calm but steady. You panicked, but I was the one who got hit. Do you see the difference? The weight of her words hung in the air. He looked around the room, at the decorations still hanging, the gifts piled in the corner, and realized how foolish it all seemed now. The celebration that was supposed to bring them closer had done the opposite. After a long silence, she said quietly, I think I need some space. He looked up quickly. What do you mean? I mean, I can't stay here right now. I need time to think, to breathe. He took a step closer, but she moved back. Please, she said softly. Just give me some time. He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger, it was hurt, deep and quiet. And he knew that if he pushed her now, he might lose her completely. She went to the bedroom, packed a small bag with a few clothes, and grabbed her phone charger. Her movements were slow but sure. When she was done, she walked back to the living room. He was still standing there, looking lost. Where will you go? He asked quietly. I'll stay with my sister for a few days. She replied. Don't worry. I just need some time. He nodded weakly, not trusting himself to speak. Before she left, she looked at him one last time and said, I never needed a perfect husband. I just needed a kind one. Then she walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The sound of that door closing echoed through the house like a final note in a sad song. The next few days were strange for both of them. She stayed at her sister's place, quiet and withdrawn. Her sister didn't ask many questions. She could tell something serious had happened. She simply offered comfort, a warm meal, and a place to rest. Meanwhile, he stayed in their empty home. Every corner reminded him of her. Her laugh, her voice, the way she used to hum while cooking. He replayed the argument in his mind over and over, wishing he could take it back. Each time he imagined the moment he threw the cake, shame washed over him again. He thought about calling her, but every time he picked up his phone, he hesitated. What could he say that would fix it? I'm sorry felt too small for the damage he had done. So he stayed silent. A few days later, she got a message from one of their mutual friends who had been at the party. The message said, You handled everything so calmly that night. I don't know how you did it. Most people would have lost it. She read the message twice and smiled faintly. She hadn't really thought about it that way. In the moment, she hadn't been calm because she wanted to look strong. She had been calm because she refused to let anger win. She didn't want to become what had hurt her. That night, as she sat with her sister, she said quietly, People think strength is shouting or fighting back, but sometimes it's walking away without losing your peace. Her sister nodded, squeezing her hand. You did the right thing. For the first time in days, she felt a little lighter. At home, he tried to fill the silence with work. He cleaned, cooked, and even fixed a few things around the house, but it all felt meaningless. Without her, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. Every time he opened the fridge, the spot where the cake had been reminded him of his mistake. He began writing down his thoughts in a small notebook, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. At first, it was just scattered words: regret, pride, anger, love. Then the sentences started to form. I hurt the one person who never stopped trying for me. I let my frustrations speak louder than my heart. He realized that what happened that night wasn't just about money. It was about ego, pride, and the inability to appreciate someone's effort. She hadn't failed him. He had failed her. A week passed before she finally returned to the house. She didn't tell him she was coming. When she walked in, he was sitting on the couch, reading quietly. He looked up, startled but relieved to see her. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "But I came because I don't believe in walking away forever when love still has a chance." He stood up slowly. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About what I did. About what I've become. You didn't deserve that. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry, and deeply." She looked at him for a long time before replying. "I don't need you to say sorry just to make things easier. I need you to understand why it hurt." He nodded. "I do. I really do." She sighed softly, glancing around the living room. It looked clean, quiet, but empty. "We can't go back to how things were," she said. "But maybe we can start learning again, slowly." He agreed. "I'll do whatever it takes." She gave a small nod. "Then we'll see." That night they sat in silence for a while, not the cold kind of silence they'd shared before, but something softer. It was the silence of two people who knew that healing would take time, but who were willing to try. And in that quiet, the first small seed of change was planted. The days that followed were quiet, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of quiet that comes when people start to understand each other again. They didn't talk much about the night of the argument, but the memory of it hung in the air like a faint shadow. He was careful with his words now, softer in tone, almost as if he was afraid that one wrong move would push her away again. She noticed the change, but she also knew that change takes time to prove itself. Saying sorry was easy, showing it was harder. She still remembered the hurt she felt that night, the sting of disrespect and the silence that followed. But part of her heart still believed in what they had built together, in the love that had once made their small home feel warm and full. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, she stood by the sink washing dishes. He walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one beside her and said, "Thought you might want this." She looked at the cup for a moment before nodding. "Thanks," she said softly. For a while they didn't talk. The sound of running water and birds outside filled the silence. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "I've been thinking about how things got so bad between us. I don't even recognize the person I was that night." She turned off the faucet and faced him. "That's good," she said gently. "It means you're starting to see what went wrong." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to lose you over my mistakes." She didn't reply right away. She picked up her coffee, took a sip, and said, "I don't want to lose us either. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. Respect is like glass. Once it cracks, you can glue it back, but the line will always show." He looked down, his hands wrapped around his cup. "Then I guess I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I never break it again." Her eyes softened, but she stayed quiet. That day, they decided to take a walk together, something they hadn't done in months. The park near their house was peaceful, with tall trees and a small pond that reflected the blue sky. They didn't hold hands like before, but they walked side by side, close enough to feel each other's presence. After a few minutes, he said, "I talked to my mother. She told me she was disappointed in me." She nodded slightly. "She should be." "I know," he said, not arguing. "She said she raised me to be better than that. And she's right. I let anger control me." She stopped walking and looked at him. "Anger isn't the problem. It's what you do with it that matters." He smiled faintly. "You always know how to say things in a way that makes sense." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned what pain teaches you." They continued walking in silence, letting the wind fill the space between them. In the following weeks, he made small efforts to rebuild what had been broken. He started helping more around the house, cooked dinner sometimes, and made sure to ask how her day went instead of just talking about his own. They began to share small laughs again, not the loud, carefree kind they once had, but the quiet ones that showed they were slowly healing. Still, there were nights when she couldn't sleep, when the memory of that argument would play in her head. She remembered the shock, the humiliation, the disbelief. Sometimes she'd roll over in bed and see him sleeping beside her, and wonder if things would ever truly feel the same. One evening, she sat on the couch with a notebook in her lap. She had started writing again, not poems or stories, just thoughts. She wrote about forgiveness, patience, and the strange way love can hurt and heal at the same time. He walked in and asked, "What are you writing?" She looked up, smiling faintly. "Just my thoughts." It helps me clear my mind. He hesitated before asking, "Can I read it?" She shook her head gently. "Not yet. Maybe one day." He nodded, understanding. That same week, she received a message from a local women's group she used to attend. They were hosting a small event about relationships and emotional balance, and they asked if she could share her thoughts or a personal story. She hesitated at first. She didn't want to talk about her pain in front of strangers. But then she realized maybe her story could help someone else. When she told him about the invitation, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "You should do it. You have something valuable to say." She looked surprised. "You really think so?" He nodded. "You're stronger than you think. You've handled everything with grace. People can learn from that." His words touched her. It was one of the first times he had encouraged her to do something for herself, without any hesitation or pride. The day of the event, she stood in front of a small group of people at a community center. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone, but her voice stayed steady. She didn't mention any names or specific details, just spoke about the power of respect, how words and actions can leave invisible scars, and how forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing peace over bitterness. The room was quiet as she spoke, everyone listening closely. When she finished, there was soft applause. A few women came up afterward to thank her for sharing. One of them said, "I needed to hear that today. You gave me courage." That night when she came home, he was waiting with dinner on the table. "How did it go?" he asked with a smile. "It went well," she said, smiling back. "I was nervous, but I'm glad I did it." "I'm proud of you," he said sincerely. She paused, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you." Over the next few days, something shifted between them. It wasn't just about making up anymore. It was about growing up together. He started listening more, not just to her words, but to her silence. She started trusting him again, little by little, testing the waters of hope. One evening, they were sitting outside watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool. He turned to her and said, "You know, I keep thinking about that night, about how quickly I destroyed something beautiful. I don't ever want to be that man again." She looked at him quietly. "Then don't be," she said softly. "Every day is a chance to be different." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," she said, "but it's possible." That night they sat there until the stars appeared. They didn't need to talk much. The peace between them spoke louder than words. As days turned into weeks, people around them noticed the change. His mother told her one afternoon, "He's not the same man he was. You've helped him see himself differently." She smiled humbly and replied, "Maybe life had to shake us so we could learn what really matters." There were still moments of tension, small disagreements about bills or chores, but they handled them differently now. No raised voices, no harsh words, just understanding. Sometimes when she looked at him, she saw not just the man who had hurt her, but the one who was trying to become better. And that gave her hope. One Sunday morning, as they were having breakfast, he said quietly, "I've been thinking of doing something different, something that can help others. Maybe volunteering, maybe speaking about anger management. I don't know yet," she smiled gently. "That's a good idea. Helping others helps you heal too." He nodded. "You helped me see that." Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't the kind of story that ended with everything magically fixed. But it was real, filled with pain, lessons, and slow healing. And that made it stronger. That evening, she sat by the window watching the rain fall softly outside. He came up behind her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "Thank you for giving me another chance." She looked up at him and smiled faintly. "Just don't waste it." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For the first time in months, she felt calm, not because everything was perfect, but because they were finally moving in the right direction. The pain had become a teacher, and the lesson was clear. Love without respect will always crumble, but when respect returns, love can slowly find its way home again. Weeks turned into months, and life began to feel calmer. The wounds that once felt raw were slowly turning into quiet scars, reminders of what they had survived together. There were still moments when the past flashed across her mind, but now those memories didn't hurt as much. They reminded her of how far she had come, how much strength she had found in herself. One morning, while she was drinking her tea by the window, a message popped up on her phone. It was from someone she had met at the community event a few weeks earlier, a woman who had listened closely to her speech about respect and healing. The message read, "We're starting a small support circle for women to share their life stories. You inspired me last time. Would you consider joining or helping us lead it?" She read it twice, smiling softly. The idea warmed her heart. She had never thought of herself as a teacher or speaker. She was just a woman who had gone through something painful and found her way out with quiet courage. But maybe that was exactly why her voice mattered. That evening, when he came home from work, she told him about the message. He looked at her thoughtfully for a moment and said, "You should do it. You have a gift for helping people see things clearly. Maybe this is something you're meant to do." She tilted her head slightly. "You really think so?" He nodded. "I do. You've changed me, not by yelling or blaming, but by showing what patience and dignity look like. People need that kind of voice." His words touched her deeply. There was a time when he never would have said something like that. His pride had always been stronger than his empathy. But now, when he looked at her, there was softness in his eyes, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. The following week, she attended the first support circle. It was held in a small community room with simple chairs arranged in a circle. There were about 12 women, some young, some older, all with stories written on their faces. The room carried a mix of sadness and hope, the kind of energy that comes when people are trying to rebuild themselves. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't use big words or dramatic gestures. She just spoke from her heart. She talked about disappointment, patience, and how it's possible to forgive without losing self-respect. She said, "Sometimes life tests us in ways we don't expect. But even when we're hurt, we can choose how we react. That choice, and the one we make in the hardest moment, can change everything." By the time she finished, several women were quietly wiping away tears. One of them said, "Hearing you speak makes me feel less alone. I've been holding so much pain inside." She smiled gently and replied, "Pain shared becomes lighter. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." That evening, as she walked home, the air felt different, fresher, lighter. She realized that something inside her had shifted again. The hurt from the past had found a purpose. What once felt like shame or heartbreak had turned into strength. When she got home, he was sitting at the table going through some paperwork. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "How did it go?" "It was good," she said, placing her bag down. "Better than I expected. I think I want to keep doing it." "That's wonderful," he said sincerely. "I'm proud of you," she smiled softly. "Thank you. It feels good to do something that matters." Over the next few weeks, her group became something she looked forward to every week. Each meeting brought new faces and new stories. Stories of loss, strength, survival, and forgiveness. Some women cried, some laughed, and some just listened quietly. But every session ended with a sense of comfort, like they had all released a little bit of their pain into the room. He supported her through it all. He would remind her to rest, make her tea before meetings, and sometimes even drive her there if it was raining. Every small gesture meant something to her. It wasn't just about the help. It was about the effort, the care he was showing again. One evening, after she came home from a meeting, she found him sitting on the porch with a thoughtful look on his face. He said quietly, "You know, watching you do all this has made me think about how I handle my own emotions. I've started reading about communication and anger. I want to learn how to be better, not just for you, but for myself." She sat beside him and smiled. "That's a big step," he nodded. "It's the least I can do. I don't want to be someone who reacts without thinking. I want to understand." She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "It takes courage to admit that," she said gently. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The quiet between them no longer felt tense, and it felt peaceful. They didn't need to say much anymore. Their presence was enough. The next weekend, her group invited her to speak at a small community event about choosing peace over anger. When she told him about it, he surprised her by saying, "Do you mind if I come to listen?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You want to come?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think I should." When the day came, she stood at the front of the small hall, nervous but ready. As she looked around the audience, her eyes found him sitting quietly in the back row. He smiled encouragingly, and that small gesture gave her strength. She began to speak, her voice calm and steady. There was a time in my life when I thought silence meant weakness. I thought if I didn't fight back, I was losing. But I learned that real strength is choosing peace when anger would be easier. She spoke about control, respect, and how every relationship, no matter how close, depends on kindness. Her words flowed naturally, not rehearsed or polished, just honest. And as she spoke, she could see heads nodding, eyes softening, hearts opening. When it was over, the room filled with gentle applause. A few people came up to thank her, and among them was him. He stood in front of her, his eyes glassy with emotion. "You were incredible," he said quietly. She smiled. "Thank you for being here." He shook his head slightly. "No, thank you for reminding me what real love looks like. I almost forgot." That night, as they drove home, the car was silent but full of emotion. He reached over and held her hand, something he hadn't done in months. She didn't pull away. After that day, he began attending some of the group's open sessions, not to talk, but to listen. He wanted to understand, to learn how others coped with anger, regret, and forgiveness. Slowly, he started opening up about his own struggles. He admitted that his pride had often made him say or do things he didn't mean. And each time he spoke, he grew a little lighter. Watching him change made her heart feel full. It wasn't just about their relationship anymore. It was about growth, about healing as individuals and as a couple. One night, as they were sitting together after dinner, he said softly, "You know, I used to think saying sorry was the hardest thing. But now I realize the hardest part is living like you're truly sorry every single day." She looked at him and nodded. "That's what makes the difference." From then on, life began to feel peaceful again. Not perfect, just peaceful. They spent more time together, laughing, cooking, and planning small things for the future. The love that had once felt broken started to feel whole again. Not because they ignored their pain, but because they faced it together. One evening, after another successful community session, she sat with her group and said, "Healing isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about learning from it, forgiving yourself, and deciding to do better tomorrow." Those words stayed with her even after the meeting ended. As she walked home under the streetlights, she thought about how far she had come, from being the woman with cake on her dress and tears in her eyes, to the woman who could stand tall and speak about strength and peace. When she reached home, he was waiting at the door. "How was it tonight?" he asked with a warm smile. "It was beautiful," she said, smiling back. And in that moment, she realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes pain isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a better one.